In this video, I'm going to be painting a really beautiful dark pink Calla Lily. I'm also going to be trying out my brand new Caran Dash, is that how you say it? Caran Dash watercolor pencils. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle, and on this channel you'll find all things watercolor, as well as a little bit of mixed media, drawing skills, some motivation, and even some art business stuff. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the little bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video here a week on Thursdays with extra content for Patreon subscribers. So today I have a full watercolor pencil step-by-step tutorial for you. We're going to paint a beautiful dark pink Calla Lily and one leaf behind it. And I'm going to try out some new pencils I bought. I've been, I keep doing these, I keep filming these clips and then deleting because I can't say the name. Caran Dash is Caran. I came from London originally. We just don't do French accents. I assume it's French anyway. So these are my new watercolor pencils. This video is not sponsored. These are the museum pencils, but I just bought them because they've got really, really good reviews. And I'm currently building a watercolor pencils course that launches in about a week and a half. And I've got kind of a ragtag bunch of watercolor pencils. I've got some good ones, I've got some bad ones. I've got some that actually don't dissolve that well, which can be an advantage if you're using them to put lines, for instance, on watercolor paintings, which, is something I often do. But I actually wanted some that dissolve a little bit better because most of the course will be fully on watercolor pencils. Now, if you're interested in that course, do pop into the video description and you can find out more about it there. And if this video has literally just come out in the last day or so, you do have the opportunity to get a discount on that course as well, because I always do pre-order discounts. Now, the best way to find out about any discounts I have on any courses is to get yourself on my email list, and the easiest way to do that is to pop into the video description and download one of my free PDFs. So I've got some free PDF guides there. You can download them for no money whatsoever. That'll pop you on my mailing list. You can unsubscribe anytime you would like to. So the course I am building has 8 modules. We're doing 8 flowers, and you can think of this YouTube video almost as an extra module, as a free module, because I never like to do everything just for paying customers, because obviously not everybody can afford to buy a course or wants to buy a course, and some people might just like to see what's involved before they buy the course. So this module is absolutely free, of course, because it's here on YouTube, and I really hope you enjoy painting along with me. I'm going to explain first of all what materials we'll be using. You do not need the same materials as me. You do not need to use the same brand pencils or anything like that. And in fact, there are lots of choices when it comes to watercolor pencils. So when it comes to choosing paper, choosing brushes, choosing what you're going to do your underdrawing with, and even choosing the pencils themselves, there are a lot of choices. And a lot of them is not a matter of right or wrong, it's a matter of personal preference and sometimes just trying out to see what you like. So I'm going to point the camera downwards now, and I'm going to start by explaining very briefly what materials we'll be using in this tutorial. So here's the photograph that I'm working from, and for this tutorial we're just going to be doing this flower here and this leaf at the back here and the stem, but of course you are free to put a background in later on if you want. And I do have other videos on this channel showing you how to paint backgrounds. This photograph came from one of the copyright free photograph sites, and so I will link to the photographer in the description of this video. Now, I'll be working on this piece of stretched paper. So this is a piece of Saunders Waterford knot paper. Now, you can choose for watercolor pencils, you can choose between using a standard watercolor paper like this or a hot press watercolor paper. There's no right or wrong. Pencils apply best to hot press, to smooth paper, but paint applies best to the slightly bumpy paper. So you can see the dilemma here. You've got both, haven't you, in one medium. Now, in terms of brushes, I'm going to be mostly using this brush here. This is a Jackman's Art Materials Synthetic size 8. This actually is one of the brushes in my set of 3 beginners set of brushes. I will link to those in the video description. For this particular tutorial, you won't need a flat brush. You can see here I've got a scrap of paper. I'll be trying my colours out on that before I put them on my painting. Very important. I've got a pencil here that I'll be doing my drawing with. You can, if you want to as well, do your sketching with watercolor pencils. Now, a lot of people recommend this, and they recommend this for standard watercolor paintings as well, with the idea that the watercolor pencil dissolves and so you don't get any pencil marks left behind. Although that's true, I find that the disadvantage to that is that you can leave a bit of a scruffy edge where you've applied those watercolor pencils. So Again, there is no right or wrong. It's up to you what you do your underdrawing with. I've got a putty rubber here. This is a Daleroni Firm putty rubber. Again, you can use any putty rubber. Another thing I've got here is some paper towel. I'm going to use that to dab my brush on to control water levels. Two more items I have here. I have a craft knife. Any sort of craft knife will do. Any sharp knife will do. And I also have an embossing pen. Now you may not have one of these. All we're going to do with this is we're going to dent the paper. You can use the craft knife instead of this. You'll just get a bit of a narrower line. Or you can use something like a ballpoint pen that's run out of ink, or any sort of point that isn't too sharp and won't cut your paper. And if you haven't used watercolor pencils before, the idea is that you sketch with them on dry paper and then you wet them with a brush. These have great reviews. I haven't even opened the box yet, it's still got the cellophane on. But those are the materials that we're going to be using in this tutorial. So now we've talked about the materials we're going to be using, the next thing is to do our underdrawing. And I'm going to give you a few hints and tips about how to draw a really lovely, beautiful flower. It's a very simple shape, so even if you're a complete beginner, you should have no trouble with this one. So let's get on with our sketch. You can see I've printed this nice and big, almost bigger than it needs to be. It's never a good idea to be working from tiny photographs, particularly ones that are on your phone. I always recommend printing out your photographs. Now there are two things you need to look for when you're drawing a flower like this. You need to look for the center of the flower, and that must line up with the stem. Here of course you can see both of those things, but sometimes the stem may be hidden by the flower itself, but the stem should always go towards the center. And also you want to look at the overall shape. So it's a good idea here to sort of almost think of this as an abstract shape, and what shape would it be if you just drew around the edge. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to think about where we're going to place it on the paper. I think I want it to sort of, you can almost make a mark. Think to yourself, well, I want it to come to here. I don't want it to come any higher up than that. And, think about the angle that the stem is going to come from. Always a good idea to avoid taking something like a stem right out of the corner. It's a very, very distracting thing. So you want to bring it either in here or up here and not out of the corner. So I'm going to sort of come up here and start thinking about just the direction that I want this stem to be coming in, and it curves. So we're looking at that, and then be thinking about perhaps where I might want the base of the flower to start. So we've got something like this going on. Always want to make sure your stem is a little bit broader at the base here. There are some stems that widen out very slightly as they get towards the flower head themselves. In other words, a tulip, for instance, might widen here. But overall, you want to make sure that this narrows as it comes up. It'll just look a bit more realistic. And drawing very lightly at this point so that you can rub out any mistakes. I now want to think about, how much is taken up with this part here and how much is taken up with the head here. So it looks to me that this is about, perhaps a third, maybe a little bit more. So we're going to be thinking about making a mark there and then going nice and big for the rest of the flower. Flower itself curves around. They're very strange flowers, these, aren't they? They're almost like one big petal. I'm going to be looking then at the shape. You can see here, this here almost comes up in a straight line. So I don't want to curve that, I don't want to tip it too much. So I'm going to sort of bring almost like a straight line up here. So I've got a bit of a guideline for that. You can check angles as well, so we can line this up with the edge of the paper, and then we can check an angle a bit like this. I can see there, I need to bring that out a little bit more. Now if you're a beginner, just concentrate on getting a flower that looks realistic. You don't necessarily have to get, the exact same flower as this one. I'm going to take that up a little bit more. Flower's mother does not need to recognise it. You just need to get something that looks like a realistic flower. I'll clean this flower up a little bit more in a moment and just do some refinements. But let me just show you how to do the leaf. Now the leaf goes behind, so the leaf starts here and continues here. What you don't want to do is draw this half of it and then draw this half of it, because it will not look realistic. What you need is for it to go seamlessly behind. And the way you do that is to draw through what's in the front and then rub out the bits you don't need. Always a good idea with a leaf to start with that centre line. So we're just going to take that centre line up. It's got a little bit of a wiggle to it in places, like so. And I think actually, now I've done that, I think actually I want this to come over further, this stem. So you can see we're just making all of these adjustments, and that will enable me then to start taking the shape of that leaf up, and we've got some little serrations in the leaf as well. So you can see that helps us to take that leaf behind the flower, and then I'll just rub out the bits that wouldn't be seen, like here where it crosses the stem. I think I'm going to make this part of the flower a little bit bigger, take it up a little bit higher. So I'm going to work on that now and just refine my drawing a little bit, but that's the basic drawing as you would lay it out. In order for this to be a good composition, if you're drawing a whole painting, it would be a good idea to have something coming over here. So I won't do that in this tutorial because it would make the tutorial too long, but you could also add yourself a nice little leaf coming here, and then perhaps a background. Absolutely lovely. Now, unless you've got a full set of, 250 colours from your manufacturer, every colour they've ever made, sometimes you're going to have to make a few compromises here. You may not have the exact right colour. I may not have the exact right colour either. Now, watercolour pencils can be layered and you can make new colours from two separate ones, but really don't worry if you have a much more limited selection of colours than me, or if you have to make a compromise and choose a different colour. Nobody will ever know. So my drawing is ready now. Do be aware of what I always say when I'm on YouTube, which is that I have to draw darker than you have to draw, because otherwise you wouldn't see it on camera. I'm one of these people, I get things in the mail and they have these signs all over them saying, these pictures of knives with big crosses. Do not ram a knife into this thing that you have just bought. I always ram a knife into the thing that I've just bought because I like living dangerously. So let's open this up and see what we have got here. Okay, so simple. I think we've got, I assume we've got two layers here. Oh, there's a little bit of fabric here, so I can lift one layer up. So those are the pencils. Grab myself a jam jar of water and we'll start having a look. So this is why it's such a great idea to print out, because it's so much easier to see. So I think the thing I'll do first actually is to choose my pink. Doesn't seem to be much of a blue based pink here, so we've got this kind of scarlet pink. Actually, that's not bad at all. This is why you need to make colour swatches, because they're so deceptive. When I first put that on, it looked almost purple burgundy, but you can see that when I water it down, it's just the right colour for our flower. There's also a purple here. Now, if I were choosing a colour for the centre there, I would be choosing something like Perylene Violet. This might be the one actually. This does look very much like a red violet. There we are. So that will be a great colour for this centre part here. It's almost somewhere in between, so it may be that we might need to just layer those two colours together. You can see how they blend together nicely. They're also dispersing very well, which is lovely. I will list in the video description, once I finish the video, I'll also list in the video description the numbers that I used if you want to look at purchasing those separately. So that's somewhere between a yellow and a green. It looks a bit more yellow to me. Let's try the one next to it. Now this looks a closer colour. So that one there is absolutely beautiful, and I think for some of these bright yellow greens that's going to be just perfect. So I'm going to set that one aside as well. So what I'm doing is taking out the colours I'm going to use and putting them over to one side, because knowing me, I'm so dumb that I put them back in the box and then not know which one I was using. Right, let's try this green, which is more of a fresher green. Really impressed with the strength of colour of these. They look to be fabulous. Wow, look at that. That is actually, you're not going to believe me here. If I get time, I'll drop a picture in the video. That's actually the colour of my car. It's obscene. It's an obscenely bright car. That looks great. Let's try the one next to it as well. I think it'll be this one, but let's just try this one as well. So that's much more of a Viridian type green. I don't think that's the one actually. I think I'm going to put that one back and keep the first one that I took out. The other colour that I may use, I could use the white of the paper as is traditional with watercolour painting. There will be uses for a white in watercolour pencils, but I think in this case I'm going to use the white of the paper because I think that'll make our flower glow much more brightly. Now, my general advice when painting flowers would always be to paint the flowers before the leaves. There are several reasons for that. For one thing, if you're working from real flowers, those are the bits that will fade and drop the fastest. For another thing, it's really easy to, just put too much greenery in and not leave enough space for your colourful flowers. However, in this case, I am going to do the stem of the plant before I do the flower itself. And the reason for that is I don't want the stem to be damp when I go in later and put the leaf behind. So we're going to do stem first and then move on to the parts of the flower and then do the leaf behind last of all. So let's put our stem in first. We're starting on a really easy part of the picture, and I'm just cleaning up a little bit so that the pencil line just becomes a little bit lighter. Sometimes just before you start, you know, even with watercolour painting or with watercolour pencils, you can just clean that line up a bit, just make it a little bit fainter so that you can just about see it. I'm now going to take two of my greens. I'm going to do this one in the centre part. Always a good idea. We're just going to rub it across like this, not pressing too hard. Always a good idea with stems to have them a little bit darker, either down both sides or to one side. What that'll do, because the curve of the stem would be lighter where it's closest to you, because dark colours recede, and there also would be a little bit of shadow as it goes around the corner. Good idea to get that lighter colour in the middle there, and then we'll take this darker colour outside, and you see that what we're doing is we're just shading in. Now, in order not to make really scruffy lines, you want to stop your shading a little bit before the edge, because we're going to use the paintbrush to take the colour up to the edge there. I'm going to go in the centre here first. You want to be careful. If I were just to rub across like this, what would happen is that I would just spread the same colour. You know, it would all mix to one colour. I wouldn't get any variation. So I'm going in the centre first. I'm going to rinse my brush and then go up the side here. And I'm using the point of the brush to make that nice smooth edge. You want enough water that it flows nicely. You can layer this up. If you let it dry and it's not dark enough later on, you can just take another layer on top. You can also work slightly onto a wet area like this, and it will release a little bit more pigment. Now, some tutors will tell you not to use your watercolour pencils on damp paper. I had a question about that today. Also, a chap in my comments of YouTube, furious beyond words at my abuse of watercolour pencils and using them onto damp paper. But the thing is, your watercolour pencils are not immortal. They're not diamonds. A medium is only as good as the results you get from it. You know, it's no point being, if you've got beautiful soft pastels, for instance, and they're stunningly lovely and they were very expensive. I don't care if you need to snap them in half to use them properly. Just snap them in half. It's the result that matters, not being fussy over your materials. And to use a watercolour pencil onto a damp surface like that does very, very little damage to them. It may soften the lead slightly, you may need to sharpen your pencil, but as I said, it's not like these things last forever. So there we are, we've got our nice stem in, a little bit lighter in the middle with a bit of shadow along the edges and just under the base here where it meets the flower. What we're going to do now is to do the underneath, the base of the flower head itself, and you'll notice that it's got some green in, it's got some green from the stem in, and it also transitions into pink. And it's got some little lines on, it's got dark lines and it's got pale lines. I'm going to be giving you some techniques for getting those just right. So next we're going to go into this underneath part, and there's two parts of it. We've got this part here and this part here. I'm going to work here first simply because I want my stem to dry before going next to it. Just like standard watercolours, things will bleed if you're working next to them, so make sure they're dry before you work next to them. Now, if you have a look at the photograph, I've got pale lines here and I've got darker lines here. This is where we're going to use our embossing pen, or as I said, you can use your craft knife. This is a technique used by coloured pencil artists, not watercolour pencils, but coloured pencil artists, and I want to make use of it here. So we're denting the paper. Now, if we were to paint over the top of that, what would happen is paint would sit into those dents and we'd get dark lines. But what happens if you sketch over the top with pencil is the opposite. So if you sketch over the top with pencil, it skips those lines and you get these lovely light lines that are really quite hard to get without using this method. Now, of course, if I then take a wet paintbrush across all of that, it's just going to go in the dips. So we're going to be very careful of painting in between. So what I'm going to do now is to get my embossing pen and put these lines on. If you need to draw them first to see how they go, that's fine, but remember to do your embossing next to the pencil line, not over the top of the pencil line, otherwise you'll be reserving the grey graphite pencil rather than reserving what you want, which is white paper. So we're going to go across here, and this is quite a thick point I've got on this embossing pen, as you can see. They're quite wiggly lines as well, so we're going to take them around, and they actually sort of follow the shape of the flower and then help. They become more curved as they come across, and they will actually help to get the realism and the shape of that flower that we're looking for. So we're going to be brave, and there's a bit of a dark line across there, and we're just going to take a little bit of it here. I'm going to shade crossways to those embossed lines to ensure that we do go over the top of them and that we're not sort of going into them. So you don't want to take the pencil in the same direction as the channels that you've done. We're going to go the opposite way. Next we're going to go back to our lightest green, so quite a bit of this colour, and then we're going to go darker over towards this edge and also along here. Now when you put red with green, you'll get a kind of a brown colour, and that is a colour that we can see in this flower. You don't want to overdo it. You never want to overdo the idea of having browns within flowers because it can make them look dead. Now I'm going to go in with my paintbrush. I've got to be careful here. As I said, if I just go across the whole thing, I'm just going to push all of the pigment into those little white lines. So I'm going to make sure my brush isn't too wet, and I'm going to start going up them individually like this. You will need to clean your brush at points as well, otherwise what will happen is you'll just end up mixing all of those colours together instead of allowing them to come across. I'm actually going to allow this to join up near the top here. As I said, we don't want all of those colours just to merge into one. We want that colour variation from the green to the pink. Now be careful when you get to a darker area like this that you don't allow that pigment just to push all the way up and cover up all of that nice light green in the middle. Do, as I said, clean your brush when you need to, and we're just taking those colours across there. And get some of this dark now that's on the paintbrush and just bring that around the side here. Now don't worry if you have gone over some of these white lines a little bit. You know, you're never going to get it perfect. Now we're going to work on the area underneath, and we've got a similar thing going on, but we've got dark lines here. So we're going to do something different here. We're going to scratch rather than emboss, and we're going to do, you could emboss as well. We're going to do the same thing, in that we're going to put the colour pencil across the top, but unlike this, we're not going to try and go in between. We're going to let the paint go across the top of these areas, and I'm holding the blade on its side. It can be deceptive on YouTube because of the angle of the camera and things like that, but I am holding this blade very flat. You don't want to cut your paper, and this is why it's important as well that you're on the watercolour paper, because it's thick enough to withstand this sort of thing. You want to make sure that you're using proper watercolour paper. The rule is always that you need to use watercolour paper if you're going to be putting water on. Again, we've got a little bit of dark showing in here, so I'm going to go across with a bit of the red as well. So I'm going to go on now, and you can see I'm allowing the paint this time, watercolour pencil, to dissolve and go into those scratched lines. They won't be as strong as the ones above, but you will get some little dark lines appearing. Again, clean my brush so that I don't drag all of that red straight up to the top, and blending round. Now if you find that those don't look as dark as you wanted, you can actually go on again to wet paper. You must be careful doing this though, because your paper is fragile, but as you can see, it works really well. You sometimes find with this technique as well that you need to do a few layers of colour or go a little darker before it completely shows up. Again, I want to make a little bit more colour strength around here, and I think we'll have a little bit more red in the middle there. Going back in with that wet brush to blend. Finally, I'm going to put some light in the base here, and we'll also have a little bit of red around here just to add that shadow in, and then blending with my paintbrush. At this point, as always, if you're getting some value from this free video, could I ask you please to click the like button, to click that thumbs up. YouTube rewards channels with audience interaction, so if you like, share, subscribe, or leave me a comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people, and I can help teach more people how to paint. So as we spoke about before, we've got that really dark, almost purplish centre to the flower. That's what we're going to put in next, and I'm going to give you a technique for blending the watercolour pencil out that ensures that you keep a nice faded blended edge and that you don't take the colour too far up the flower. So I'm going to do this centre area here. I'm going to actually use a couple of different techniques. So we're going to go in with that light green again, sort of yellowish green, and I'm going to very gently just shade here. It does fade into white here, so don't want to go crazy with this. I'm now going to take a larger brush and completely clean water, and I'm going to blend into that area. So it's a big mistake with watercolour pencils to start here and blend outwards. All that will happen is you'll spread that colour up and up and up and you'll never get rid of it. Whereas in reality it goes to white here. So I'm going to start outside of it like this with clean water. Take this round and then we're going to come in towards this area. Especially with high quality watercolour pencils like these ones are, as I said, you just keep pushing that pigment up if you do it the other way around. A little bit of excess water, there's just a damp brush. I'm going to lift that out. Now this is damp, I'm going to work straight onto it. Dark in the centre here. And by going onto wet paper, the watercolour pencils actually release a lot more pigment. So I'm going to risk annoying the watercolour pencils police. And just in order to adjust the colour slightly, I'm going to go a little bit of the darker purple as well, the violet. You can see that we get a lot of depth of colour to it then. I'll take one or two little lines outwards. Again, starting outside and coming round so that we can blend this edge. But also so that I can go along the edge here and get a real smooth line. And I just want to get a little bit more going on there, like so. Next up, we're going to do the most exciting bit. We're going to put that big pink petal in. Now you'll notice that you've got two things going on here. So you've got kind of a blended area, but you've also got some tiny sort of very subtle straight lines in there as well, some little lines on the petal itself. So let's look at how to do that and keep that beautiful, soft, blended, natural effect. So onto the main flower head now, and let's clean up this pencil again a little bit. So we're going to shade now, and we're going to shade just as it is here, so darker here, and then we've got a bit more here, got some gaps of white here, got little touches on the edge, and you see how as well there's a lot of these lines coming down, so we're going to get that impression of that. None of them are hard edge lines, those who want it all to be wet, so what we're going to do first is just apply our pencil all over these areas before going in with the brush. See, I'm not taking that pencil right up to the edge because this being textured paper, we get very sketchy edge that way. So by shading in the direction that the petal itself is coming out, it means that if we get any lines left behind, there'll be lines that are travelling in the right direction. Now there's a little bit of a curve here, and we've got some dark around the edge here. You can always add more, but it's hard to take it away, especially some of the colours that stain more, and reds and purples do tend to stain. So we can always add another layer if it's not dark enough. It'll be really hard to get it off if it's too dark. This is just clean water at the moment, but we'll drag some colour in shortly. See here we start to pick up some colour, and I'm just going to put a touch of colour along that edge. So I don't even need to add any with the pencil, I'm just dragging it around with the brush like so, and then coming up and out. Gone over the edge a little bit there, but that's okay, we can soon neaten that up. You see how we get this strong colour here. Really important here not to drag this across the white area, so I'm going to take that edge out there. Then I'm going to clean my brush. Again, start on this light area and just blend that across. So cleaning when I need to, drying my brush when I need to, because I don't want to get a load of drips on here. You can see how I bring this in now. See how strong that is. So again, we've got to be careful we don't drag that into the middle. So we're just going to stop it around here. But I don't want to just leave it like that because there'd be a real hard edge there. So again, clean the brush, dry slightly, and then we can start down here on this clean area and come up. I've got a slight slope to my board, which is why it's running here. It appears to you as if my board is sloping down, but it's actually sloping away from me. That's why the paint appears to be running upwards. That's just so I can put it on the camera a bit more easily. I do advise when you're doing watercolours for you to, most of the time at least, keep your board flat. It's just so much easier. So there we are, we can see we've got that nice edge coming around there. Again, I'm going to start down here. You see how I'm working quite methodically one side to the other. That's so that we don't get any of these areas here just drying and leaving strange line shapes. You never want to panic if you drop some water or just make a little mistake. It can always be lifted out later on when it's dry, or perhaps even just covered up with a leaf or something like that. And now I can just fill in that little gap that was left with dark paint. Because it was pencil, it's now turning into paint. And now I'm going to just come across here. The same in this area up here. I want to get a little more colour in here and just drag this down. Using the edge of my pencil just to neaten that edge up. If you neaten the edge like this and you don't want it to look like you've outlined, then the trick is just to keep shading in to the middle with that colour. And we want to get this idea that there's, you know, some curve to this shape here. And again, just softening those in with water so they just barely show. Now just adding one or two more touches down here so you can look at your picture and just anywhere that you think should be a little bit stronger can go in. Just do be careful that you don't cover up all of the white and kill your flower. Really feeling quite happy with that. There's one or two errors. I've got a tiny bit here. What I'll do is when it's dry, I'll just lift that out with a bit of cotton wool, and this one here will actually be covered up by the leaf. So pretty happy with that flower at this point. Lastly, to set off our lovely flower, we're going to do that big leaf at the back. It's really interesting, isn't it? It's got some light greens, it's got some dark greens, and it's also got those white patches. So forgive me at this point if the light levels have changed at all, or the angle of the camera, because not only is it a different day when I'm filming now, but also I had to completely disassemble my tripod in order to take part in a Zoom Kung Fu class last night. That's enough of my crazy private life. Right, what I'm doing now just quickly is I'm just going to clean up that little mistake there. So I've got a piece of masking tape here and I've stuck it to my clothes a few times so it's not too sticky. And what I'm going to do now I've got a piece of, I mean we call this cotton wool in the UK. Somebody in America said it's not called that. I don't know, you'll have to let me know in the comments. It's barely damp, you don't want it wet, and you're just going to rub like this. And you can use it almost as an eraser. Now, I know some of you will say, well, you've got these magic sponge erasers, but to be honest, I find this works just as well, if not better. So we're going to do the leaf now, and you can see I've started actually, got these white gaps on the leaf, so well, not even white gaps, are they? They're sort of markings, really. And they're not just applied randomly, they're next to these kind of veins that go up. So that's what I want to get an impression of now. And because we're going to work sort of negatively and we're going to just have the white of the paper as white, I need to go round these areas. So just putting a few of those in. There are many, many advantages, as I've spoken about previously, in drawing as you go along. So not pressing too hard. You never want to get, you know, really hard lines where you dent your paper, because all that will happen then is that you'll find that you won't get rid of that line. I can go back to my smaller brush now. Got some clean water, being really careful not to mix up sort of pink water and green water. Those colours are opposite, and so you really don't want to get green and pink together unless you are letting them cross like this on purpose to get neutrals. You might also be wondering why I have, you know, a brand new set of I don't know how many there are, maybe 40 new pencils, and I'm only using, you know, 5 or 6. And the reason is that I always like to stick to a limited palette, not overall but within each painting, because it will just help to give your painting a feeling of sort of cohesion. Now you can see at this stage I can't very easily see the difference between the leaf and the stem in front, so what we'll need to do is we'll need to strengthen that. But this is an underwash for the leaf, we are going to go darker on top. So I'm going to continue and take this colour right the way up the rest of the leaf now, and then we'll work on top to bring out the details. Often on YouTube it will appear like I just wait, you know, half a second and then something's dry, but do wait until this first layer is dry. And what I'm doing then is I'm going along and I'm going to leave some sort of white gaps around where those veins are. I did use the larger paintbrush for the area at the top, by the way, and you can see that what I'm doing is leaving that underneath layer showing through. Much easier to do it this way when you've got light veins on a dark leaf than, you know, try and leave a gap perhaps and paint in the gap. All you end up with then is a load of white paper showing through that never looks very good. So we're just going to take it up like this. And by putting that underwash on, we know that there's not going to be any white gaps, except for these actual little details, which are obviously actually white. So I'm going to do that now for the whole of this leaf and then look at any areas that need emphasising further. So I've got paint on all of it, but it's not quite as I want it yet. So always at the end of a picture, there's a point where you go around, you see if any areas need strengthening, adding that drama, adding that light to dark. Any areas like this one here that can't really be seen very easily against the thing that's next to them, you want to emphasise, make one bit lighter, one bit darker. Generally the part that's behind, but not always, it depends on the colour of the thing that you're doing. I also want to, on the top of the flower here, I've got this real kind of sense of shadow going up here that I haven't quite got yet, so I want to put that in as well. Now, if I just put water on one little area, I'll definitely leave a drying line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take water over the whole of that area and work back into there. So I've got my large brush and I've got clean water, and I'm literally going to go across that whole area, bearing in mind what we said before about not dragging dark into light. So I will at intervals, even though I'm taking the water over the whole area, I will at intervals when I go to these light areas clean my paintbrush so that I maintain that nice lightness I've got there. So just giving my paintbrush a rinse now and again so that I go onto the white with mostly clean water. And I also just want to get, I'm working onto wet paper here, so I just want to get a little bit more shadow on this area here. I'm actually going in with a bit of the purple, as well as my sort of maroon colour, and I'll put some more of the pink in as well. And as I said before, you want to be working in the direction that the flower is actually growing. So I'm going to get my brush now and smooth that out. There is a linear quality to it, so we're not going to worry too much if we've got some tiny lines in there. If you find at this stage that you've gone too dark and that you haven't got those light areas, it is possible to work in with your white watercolour pencil. I've got one here, you know, we could add a little bit more in, but bear in mind that they're not fully opaque, so you know you're always going to have a better result if you can avoid going into those areas. But you can see we can just bring a little bit of lightness in where we want it, and being careful not to overwork. I'm going to look now at the leaf and everything here. You see there's not much difference here, so I'm going to go in darker behind. When green overlaps red, you tend to get brown, but because we've also got, you know, there's a purplish hint to this as well, we've got some blue in, so it should stop it going too brown. You don't want too much brown in flowers or leaves unless you know you're painting something that's decaying in the autumn. And I'm also going to take some of this up the side of the main stem. You can see here there's a darkness to it. I could, if I had any blues out, I could use a blue here, but I want to stick to colours that I am already using. So I'm going to go round now and strengthen those leaf veins and just pop any darks anywhere that I think needs a bit more definition. So you can see I've gone round, I've strengthened various areas so that everything shows up against everything else. I want to be careful at that stage not to get into the habit of just outlining everything, because you want to look more at lights and darks, tonal contrast, rather than just necessarily outlining things so that they show up. The last thing I'll have to do on this picture is to remove some of these pencil marks, but I want to wait until it's fully dry before I do that. Really happy with these results. Really happy with the watercolour pencils, and I might even put a background in at some point in a future video. So do let me know in the comments how you found this tutorial, and ask me as well if there's any other watercolour pencils tutorials that you would like me to make for you. Just pop that into the comments as well. Don't forget you can always pop over and join my Facebook group if you would like to show me this painting or any other paintings that you've done. It's a lovely, friendly, accepting group. We have everybody there from complete beginners up to experienced artists, and everybody gets along so well. It's a wonderful, safe, welcoming space for you to communicate with other people who are also learning to paint. Don't forget, if you are interested in my watercolour pencils course, to check that link out as well in the video description. And in that course you'll find another 8 flowers just like this one, but not only do you get a video tutorial, you'll also get a downloadable step-by-step PDF and a photograph to work from, and lots of other support as well. And if you'd like more help with your watercolour pencils work, I have a great video I think you're really going to enjoy. You can watch that video right now.